Yeah. And next one is just the title slide. Right. So water governance, I feel, is neglected. That's my title. Basically, it's so difficult to overemphasize the importance of governance. Outcome of all water projects, plans, investments, resource deployment of resources depends on how they are governed. We find a lot of attention to the projects, plans, technologies, resources, institutions, laws, individuals, outcomes, specific components like water, environment, flood, drought, etc., but relatively much less on governance. At least in India, I find very little of it. A lot of literature exists about dams, water at macro level, but far less about the state of water governance in India. And that is why I feel this is a much neglected subject. Next, please. Can you have next slide?
Sorry, yes, I'm trying to change. Yes.
Okay, right, yeah. Okay, so what is water governance? The report of the World Commission on Dams says that good governance comprises the rule of law, effective state institutions, uh, uh, transparency and accountability in the management of public affairs, respect for human rights, and the participation of all citizens in the decisions that affect their lives. While there may be debates about the most appropriate forms they should take, there can be no disputing the importance of these principles. Governance basically can be defined in simplistic way that what government does is governance, but this can mean many different things. Some key components of the governance includes institutions, the laws, the values, the standard operating procedures, the people who govern, uh, the governance culture, etc. Three major pillars of governance, as I see it, are transparency, accountability, and participation. There are other key values: sustainability, equity, independence, responsiveness, efficiency. A clear definition of conflict of interest is very important because we don't find that in India at all. Understanding of that, and empathy, of course. In essence, how democratic, equitable is the governance that also addresses the issues related to unequal power relations. Transparency, transparency is not only required as a value in governance, so that all the information is in public domain, but also there is very clear transparency about how the governance is supposed to function. What constitutes governance? That has to be also in public domain in very clear terms. Uh, there has to be a right-based approach versus GDP at any cost approach, which is the current prevailing norm is that GDP at any cost is important. Uh, Involuntary risks are very important. They should be identified, articulated, addressed. Next, please. So this is just photographs of some of the opposition to dams. When we don't govern properly, we end up with this kind of oppositions. Next, please. Some of the key other aspects of water governance is like there has to be a comprehensive policy that acknowledges resource reality, fundamental governance values and framework. There has to be action plan to implement the policy. There has to be a basic resource literacy. Where does our water come from? What are water blessings? Institutions in line with the policy and resources. And most water statistics start and end at macro level, unfortunately. But that is also very mischievous, not only inappropriate, because macro level statistics help push big projects. And that's why I call it mischievous. Next, please. So the governance also happens at so many different levels, particularly typically vertically, one can see at the global, regional, national, and state level. But water governance needs to be looked at decentralized level in a bottom-up way. Since water needs, water demands, water availability, water resources are decentralized. And so management must also happen at that level, as even Elinor Ostrom would say. Only the residual function should be the concern of the next higher level of governance, starting from the bottom level. There should be, of course, role for media, independent academics, and judiciary. In addition to vertical, there is horizontal governance players. For example, private sector is increasingly getting a role many times very inappropriately in water sector. And sometimes there is also a role for civil society, which you can describe as a sort of horizontal governance progress. There is an increasing tendency to centralize the governance and also eliminate the role of independent civil society in governance. To just give you instance, in India, government of India at a central level has launched a massive scheme to provide water to every household in the rural area in India. It's supposed to end by, the target is to complete it by next year, 2024. But this is a very centralized, drinking water provision cannot be and need not be a centralized project like that. Next, please. So there are various subjects within the water governance, like river governance, reservoir governance, rainwater governance, pollution governance, which will include sewage treatment plant and central environment treatment plant governance, environment governance, forest governance, governance of social impacts mitigation, wetlands, water bodies, disaster compliance, food and drought, floodplain riparian zone governance, outcome governance, sustainability, climate governance, groundwater governance, project governance, financial governance, information governance, conflict governance, grievance, sand management, inland fisheries. There is various components of water sector will require delineation of its own governance. Next, please. And then the government happens at different stages of any progress in the water sector, for example. So the first stage will be needs assessment, then prioritization of needs, because not all needs are necessarily sacrosanct. Options assessment, selection of appropriate options, decision-making stages, then project planning stages, then environment assessment, environment clearance, then implementation stage where there is importance of monitoring and compliance. Then once the implementation is completed, then the operation phase starts. And when the project is no longer has finished its useful life, then there is the issue of decommissioning, which is never really considered as part of the project cycle. The involvement of affected people and wider group of stakeholders at each stage is very important in the governance. Next, please. So basic requirements of effective governance. One is that there has to be accurate, relevant, current information about the resource in public domain necessarily, and it should be promptly in public domain. There has to be clearly defined standard operating procedures, how the institutions will function, governance will happen. There should be clearly defined legal and regulatory processes, because ambiguity can have many undesirable consequences. It also helps vested interests. There has to be clearly defined policies about limitation of private sector role in governance of public natural resources. Next, please. So there is a need for more research work in water governance. In India, we certainly need much more research work in water governance. I'm talking about research because I'm talking to research community, but it is also equally important that we need much more work in other aspects of the governance also. We need political scientists, economists, experts who can be public advocates for better water governance. We need more research work that can critique and challenge the current water governance paradigm and practices and push for more bottom-up decentralized water governance. We need research about examples of better water governance from across India and world to push for change in current water governance. We need research work to look at the real-time situations, role of institutions and governments in water governance at various levels, including UN, multilateral development banks, national to grassroots level. Next, please. And we can look at all this in microcosm with respect to a number of case studies. One of the case studies is about Arwari River Basin Parliament. Let me describe it in a little more detail. Uh, in Alwar district in Rajasthan in Western India, about 28 years back, an initiative was started to rejuvenate local water bodies, which were called johars in that area. They're basically water harvesting tanks with earthen bunds. They are traditional systems, but they were in disuse and disrepair and are not managed. So in 1985, when the effort started by a voluntary organization called Tarun Bharat Sangh, over the years it led to, they started with one or two places, then they expanded, and then they took up hundreds of them. They ended up doing more than 1,500 of them. It not only rejuvenated those specific water bodies, but it also led to increase in groundwater level. It started, in fact, percolating into the rivers in the nearby area, small streams. And ultimately, Arwari River, one of the rivers of that area, became flowing river. The migration that was used to happen not only stopped, but some of the migrant people came back. So a transformation of that area happened. Now, one of the interesting institutional innovation that was done in that area was that once the river started flowing, the government said that, okay, give river is flowing and the river is government property, so we will give fisheries contract. But people oppose, saying that, no, we will decide. This river has become rejuvenated because of our efforts. So a parliament of the villages within that catchment of that river was formed. Each village in the basin sent two people to the parliament. And that river parliament, then took decisions about how to manage and use the resource of that river basin. So this is a very interesting experiment in governance of a river in India, of course, in non-governmental level. This initiative, this initiative in the Alwar district was also historically unprecedented way honored by no less than the President of India. He went to that area and honored the community for that work. There are other such case studies we can look into in detail. For example, Kane-Betwa River Link project, how the sewage treatment plants are constructed, but they don't almost never function properly. In our urban rivers are getting worse stage every year. Environment governance of dams and hydropower projects and disasters, operation of reservoirs, groundwater management, reliable water information. So India Central Water Commission is the main agency which is involved in charge of collecting information related to water in India. But it is also an agency which is involved in so many different other functions, including monitoring, approving, compliance, designing, policy making, financial clearances. So, there are a lot of conflict of interest going on. It is a poor track record. The information that it gathers is not even in public domain. So, as against that, one institution that I know of seems very interesting relatively is USGS. So USGS not only collects what I understood when I was in US in 2011 at the invitation of the government. They took us around in US to understand the water situation in US. And one of the things I understood from USGS was that it not only collects information across the US on daily basis, but puts out promptly next day in public domain. And it is not involved in any other functions of the water sector, except gathering information. So its focus is gathering the best information and putting out in public domain. It has no X to ground to doing anything else, which is not the case with the CWC, for example. Maharashtra is another interesting case study. In India is the third largest dam builder country in the world, and Maharashtra has the largest number of big dams in India by far. And almost 40% of the big dams of India are in Maharashtra. And Maharashtra is also the state which is maximum in news for reasons like drought, sometimes for floods, sometimes for pollution, but number of wrong reasons for water issues. It's also a state which is till recently the highest sugar production. A very water scarce area of Marathwada of uh, mm, Maharashtra has the highest number of sugar factories, and it has its own lobby. So, very lot of inappropriate kind of water situation we can see in state like Maharashtra, which has highest number of dams and sees highest number of problems. Next, please. So this is so far I had mainly looked at the governance issues as I see it. I now will start looking at some of the more detailed issues. For example, India has a lot of water blessings in water sector, rivers, groundwater aquifers. Incidentally, India is the largest, is the highest, I mean, the biggest groundwater user in the world. And in fact, it is larger than if you add the amount of groundwater used by number 2 and 3 country in the world, that is US and China. If you add that, even India has even larger groundwater use. So that's a major blessing. The wetlands, the local water system, the forests, the Himalayas, the Western and Eastern Ghats, the fertile and rich soils, the traditional water wisdom, both in terms of technologies and management systems. And of course, our monsoon coming on time, almost every year, clockwork like. And this, I believe, is a major, all of these are major water blessings for India. But we do not seem to value this blessing if you look at the way we are dealing with the water establishment or policies, practices, plans, etc. Next, please. Water availability typically is given in terms of how many cubic meters was available in at national level, macro level. In 1950, and today it's only 1500, so we are in water scarce country. Now, this is a completely misconceived, misguiding notion, I feel. Firstly, because it gives a macro level picture, but water is never used or available at the macro level. It's always at the micro level, decentralized level. Secondly, it's also, as I said earlier, it's a mischievous way to put it, pose the problem, because it says that, okay, if you need so many billion cubic meters of water, you need big projects, each of millions of cubic meters. So it tries to push, it's a way of pushing major big dams and interlinking of rivers and such projects. But water is firstly and essentially a local issue. Next, please. So there is acceptance that India's water sector is in turbulence. They're facing very serious challenges in every aspect, many aspects. But we know very little about the analysis of water governance in India and challenging opportunities that we face in terms of water governance. I already talked about Maharashtra as a symbol of crisis in many senses. Next, please. So water management challenges, essentially, we have enough water actually. The challenge is to make it available in the form, in the quality, in the quantity, and the timing, where and when it is required, and for justifiable needs. So that whole management challenge can be divided into having reliable water information, choosing right storage options, moving away from non-performing large dam agenda, reservoir management individually and collectively, flood management, river management, catchment management, agriculture management, etc. And of course, climate change has to be taken into account, which complicates all of these management issues. Next, please. In terms of reliable water management, there is a acceptance even at the highest level in Niti Aayog and other committees that we don't have reliable quality and reliability of water information in India. And as I said, CWC is a problematic institution which is in charge of getting all the water and river information. We need an independent institution to do that. Next, please. So the information gap constitutes how much water we have, how much water we use in different sectors, in different seasons, in different areas. For where does that water come from? Where does the water after the use goes, how much comes from surface water, groundwater, rainfall, what are the interactions between these various sources and the soil water interactions, and how climate change will affect all these. So a lot of this, some of this information is available, a lot of that is not available, and we need to put in system to get reliable information. Next, please. This is also a very important issue. One of the academic of US, John Briscoe, who was also the World Bank's advisor to the president of the World Bank, and he was a country director of India for some years, World Bank's country director in India. He floated the idea and advocacy that you should measure how a country is managing its water by in terms of per capita water storage it has. And he would count in terms of water storage only big dams. And he will end up saying that, oh, we need so much water storage, but we have only so little, and so we need to go for more big dams. This was his basic thrust of his advocacy. Now, this was again a very mischievous way to put it. Firstly, I mean, there is a good, the logic that water is available only in monsoon, we need to make it available across the year, and hence we need storage is right. There is a science behind it, logic behind it. But the point is, from that, the next step should be, okay, what are water storage options we have? Whether we have a number of water storage options in terms of soil moisture, which is never counted as a water storage option, but it's a major storage option. There is a local water systems, that kind of what I described for Alwar in Arwari, and that they are available all across the India. Then we have wetlands. We have groundwater. As I said, groundwater is the biggest water used in India. And that aquifers are getting depleted. The water levels are going down. So again, so that aquifers are possibly the most benign groundwater, water storage option. And of course, we have to use the available, or we already have created a huge water storage infrastructure, and we need to use it optimally, which we are not doing. We are not even monitoring. So even only after we exhaust all these lower cost, lower impact options, we can go to the next level of storage option. Next, please. Similarly, flood management. Now, flood is not necessarily a disaster. It's a part of the natural hydrological cycle of a monsoon-driven climate. That if the catchment in any river basin has sufficient capacity to hold, recharge, store water, and drain water, then there will be no floods. But when your capacity to hold, recharge, and drain is less than the available, the water that comes into the catchment, then there will be floods. So we need to ensure that these capacities are sufficient, they are maintained properly. And then we need to have, for example, proper reservoir management. This is a very important issue, because if every reservoir, every big dam potentially can help moderate flood in the downstream area. It's a very important governance issue here. However, if the reservoir is not managed properly, then that reservoir can also actually become a source of avoidable disaster for the downstream area. So, reservoir management is very important. We can go into the detail if there are questions on this. Similarly, regulatory, in that we need to have regular updating of rule curves, river carrying capacities, etc. Next, please. The reservoir management I just mentioned, actually it has happened number of cases where the wrong operation of reservoir has led to avoidable disasters. Just in recent years in Kerala in 2018 and 19, in Krishna Basin in Karnataka and Maharashtra in 2019 and 9, in Chambal Basin in 19, SS Sardar Sarovar project in 2020, Narmada, etc. Next, please. Disaster management, again, is very important, not only the flood management, but also in terms of how do you manage the drought. There are other water-related disasters one can have. including landslides and wrong operation of reservoirs, etc. Next, please. The river management is very important. A river is possibly the most important of the entity in the water sector, but that's an entity which is least governed. There is no agency really which is governing, monitoring state of the rivers, governing rivers. And even the rivers don't have basic environment flows. You know, what is this? A new term that has come into the vogue in last 2 or 3 decades, environment flows. But India's rivers don't even have that. Most of the rivers. In fact, almost most rivers don't have that. Next, please. So this is just an example of how we are building bumper to bumper projects, hydropower projects. This is in Tista Basin in Sikkim and West Bengal downstream area. Next, please. Ganga gets major attention in India. No less than 3 prime ministers have, including the current one, have
Himanshu,
publicly
sorry
spoken. Yeah,
for
I'll
interrupting.
just.
One more minute. Last
Okay.
minute. Please wrap.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So Ganga has got lot of attention, but you know, just one instance that Professor G.D. Agrawal actually went on fast for Ganga, and this government, this was in 2018 when this current government was in rule, they refused to address the concerns, and he actually died fasting for Ganga. Yeah, can you go to the next and keep going on to the next? This is just the photos. This is Alaknanda Basin. Next, please. Next. I'll not go into all these slides. Keep going. Yeah. Catchment management, agriculture management. Next. Groundwater is India's water lifeline. I'll again go into detail if necessary. This is just a graph showing that. Next, please. How our irrigated area from groundwater is going up over the years. Next, please. But at the same time, most of the money we spend is on major big dams, but the area irrigated by big dams are actually falling down over the same period. Next, please. And this is hydropower performance, how per megawatt installed capacity hydropower generation is going down over the years. Next. Urban water is happening, is more and more influential footprint is increasing, but there's a complete policy vacuum. Next, please. Water core. Next. 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 And there are a number of hopes. I'll also, go into this detail if there are questions. Next, please. Thank you. Yeah, we can have questions and discussion now.